There are stories that begin long before the wound, before the first slight, the first dismissal, the first slow exclusion. They begin in childhood, in the way a name is said at a dinner table, in which child gets pulled close and which one learns to stand just slightly apart. This is one of those stories, and it ends on a Saturday night in a ballroom full of people in black tie, when a man named Derek Calloway raised his hand and brought it down across his younger brother's face in front of 200 witnesses, and made the last mistake of his comfortable, privileged, carefully constructed life. But to understand why what happened next was so precise, so devastating, so utterly impossible to escape, you have to understand where it started. Before we get into this story, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments and tell me, have you ever had to get even with someone? I want to know. Marcus Calloway was 31 years old, and he had been the wrong son his entire life. Not in his own eyes, not in the eyes of anyone who actually knew him, his friends, his colleagues, the small circle of people he trusted, but in the eyes of the Calloway family apparatus, the inherited money, the old money judgment, the dining room that smelled like oak and obligation. Marcus had always been the footnote, the afterthought, the one who showed up to Christmas and sat at the end of the table nearest the kitchen. He was the son, younger than Derek by 6 years. That gap had always mattered more than it should have. Derek had been born into the first version of their parents' marriage, the hopeful version, when their father, Gerald Calloway, was still building Calloway and Associates, a mid-sized commercial real estate firm based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. By the time Marcus arrived, the money had come in, the family had moved to the larger house in Myers Park, and Gerald had become the kind of man who wore his success like armor, harder, more selective with his warmth. Marcus's mother, Paulette, had tried. She was a gentle woman by nature, careful with her words, and she had seen what Marcus saw, that Derek had been handed a mirror, and Marcus had been handed a window. Derek reflected everything Gerald wanted to see in himself: tall, loud, quick with a handshake. Comfortable in a room full of money, Marcus was observant where Derek was declarative, patient where Derek was impulsive. He read people slowly and accurately, where Derek performed for them. In the Calloway household, Derek's qualities had been called charisma. Marcus's had been called cold. He'd grown up hearing the comparisons, not always spoken but always present. At Derek's college graduation from Duke, Gerald had made a toast that went on for 11 minutes. At Marcus's from UNC Charlotte, he'd said, "Good work, son," and refilled his glass. Marcus had stood there and understood, clearly and without drama, that this was simply the shape of things. He didn't hate his father for it. He understood it. Gerald Calloway had built a mythology around his firstborn, and mythologies, once constructed, are almost impossible to dismantle from the outside. What Marcus did instead was work. After college, he had gone into financial analysis, not the flashy investment banking track that Derek had taken, burning through 2 firms and a failed boutique fund before landing a comfortable VP title at Calloway and Associates, courtesy of their father. Marcus had joined a mid-size wealth management firm called Hargrove Capital in Charlotte, starting at the analyst level, and had spent 9 years building something genuinely impressive through nothing but precision and patience. By 31, he was a senior portfolio strategist, managing discretionary accounts worth a combined $340 million, with a reputation for risk assessment that had earned him a quiet but significant standing in Charlotte's financial community. He did not talk about this at family dinners. He had learned early that accomplishment in a different arena doesn't translate to recognition in the one that matters to the people judging you, and the Calloway Arena had Derek's name on it. Marcus had his own apartment on the south side of uptown Charlotte, a small but well-chosen investment property he'd bought at 28. A close group of 3 friends, all sharp, all loyal, and a life that from the outside looked exactly like what it was. A man who had decided to build something real, instead of performing for people who had already made up their minds about him. He had made peace with his family in the careful, calibrated way people make peace with things they cannot change. He showed up. He was civil. He didn't cause scenes. He absorbed the small slights. Derek interrupting him mid-sentence at Sunday dinners. Derek taking credit for a connection Marcus had facilitated that landed Calloway and Associates a $2.2 million lease deal. Derek's habit of calling him little brother in a tone that made the word feel like a leash, and he let them go. He let them go until the night of September 14th, his father's 60th birthday party. Gerald Calloway had turned 60 in September, and Derek had organized the event. Not asked. Organized. He had announced at a family dinner in July that he was planning a black tie event at the Dunhill Hotel in Uptown Charlotte, 200 guests, catered with a live quartet and a custom photo display of Gerald's life. He had presented this as a gift. Marcus had offered to contribute, financially, logistically, in any capacity. Derek had waved him off. "I've got it. You just show up." Marcus had shown up. He had purchased a canali tuxedo for the occasion. Not because he needed to prove anything, but because it was his father's 60th, and that mattered to him regardless of how the ledger of recognition had always been weighted. He had written a personal speech. He had commissioned a framed photo print of himself and Gerald from a trip they'd taken to Lake Norman when Marcus was 9, one of the few uncomplicated memories he had of his father. He had it wrapped. He had arrived at the Dunhill at 6:50 for a 7 o'clock start. He had not expected what came next. The first hour was unremarkable. The kind of family social event discomfort Marcus had learned to move through gracefully. Handshakes with Calloway and Associates partners he didn't. No, polite exchanges with relatives who called him by the wrong name twice. The quiet architecture of being peripheral at an event built around your own family. He had a glass of scotch. He found his seat, table 9. Near the back, adjacent to the bar and the kitchen corridor. He noted, without particular surprise, that Derek and his wife, Sandra, were at the head table with Gerald. He noted, also without surprise, that the photo display covering 2 panels near the entrance contained 43 photographs of Gerald Calloway's life. Marcus appeared in 2 of them. Derek appeared in 19. He counted. He was that kind of person. By 8:30, the dinner had been served, the speeches had been made. Derek's was 14 minutes, rehearsed, met with applause. Marcus was not given a slot, and Gerald had made his rounds. He had stopped at table 9 for approximately 90 seconds. Pat humped Marcus on the shoulder and said the framed photo was real nice. Then he had moved on. Marcus sat with that for a moment. Then he picked up his glass, straightened his jacket, and decided he would give his father the speech privately, later, when the room had thinned. He was standing near the outer edge of the main hall when Derek found him. It was 8:54. Marcus remembered the time because he had checked his watch 30 seconds before, a habit, a tick, and because the next 4 minutes were the kind that get encoded permanently. Derek was 3 drinks in, which on Derek was a specific kind of loose, not sloppy, but entitled. The social filters that kept his contempt at a manageable simmer dropped away, and what came through was the unedited version. He crossed the floor toward Marcus with the energy of someone who had been building toward a confrontation and had decided the moment was right. "You've been walking around this room like you belong here," Derek said. Marcus looked at him. "It's Dad's birthday, Derek, Dad's birthday." Derek repeated it like it was a punchline. "Right, which I organized, which I paid for, which I spent 4 months putting together while you, what, wrote a speech nobody asked for." Marcus said nothing. "You always do this," Derek said. "You show up. You stand in the corner with your glass, and you look at everything like you're taking notes. Like you're better than this. Better than us. I don't think that. You do." Derek's voice had risen. A few heads at the nearest tables had turned. "You've always thought you were smarter than me, since we were kids. You think I don't see it? You think Dad doesn't see it? Derek, no." His voice was sharper now. The heads had multiplied. "You don't get to Derek me tonight. Not here. You want to know what Dad actually thinks of you? You want to know why you're at table 9? Because you're an afterthought, Marcus. You always have been. You're tolerated. You're not. And then he did it. He raised his right hand and brought it, open-palmed, across Marcus's left cheek. Not a punch, not a shove, a slap, deliberate, contemptuous, the kind of blow designed not to injure but to humiliate. The sound of it cut through the ambient noise of the room. The quartet had paused between songs. The timing was accidental, but the silence was not. 200 people heard it, and into that silence Derek Calloway said loudly and clearly, "You're not welcome here. You never were." The room held its breath. Marcus did not move. He stood with absolute stillness, his face turned slightly from the impact, and the room waited for the eruption, for the scene, the escalation, the shouting match that the moment seemed to demand. It did not come. Marcus straightened. He looked at his brother with an expression that several witnesses would later describe in almost identical terms. Calm. Not stunned calm, not suppressed rage calm. Calm like a chess player who has just watched his opponent move exactly where he needed them to move. He set his glass on the nearest table. He picked up his jacket. He collected the wrapped photo print from where he'd left it near the side wall. And he walked out of the Dunhill Hotel without a word. Gerald Calloway had been 20 feet away. He had seen it, he said nothing. In the Uber home, Marcus sat in the back seat and did not replay the slap. He replayed the silence that followed it. 200 witnesses. His father's business partners, Calloway and Associates clients, family friends. People who had watched Derek Calloway physically strike his younger brother at a black tie event and heard him declare, on the record, that Marcus had never been welcome. By the time he was home, Marcus Calloway had stopped being the afterthought. He had started being the architect. After what Derek just did to Marcus, on a scale of 1 to 10, how angry are you right now? Drop your number in the comments. Because it's about to get a whole lot more satisfying. There's a particular kind of grief that settles in when a pattern you've always half known gets confirmed out loud. Marcus sat in his apartment that night and felt it. Not the sharp grief of surprise, but the slow, heavy grief of certainty. He had always suspected that the family's architecture had a foundation of contempt beneath its politeness. Now he had 200 witnesses who had watched it exposed under chandeliers. He poured 2 fingers of bourbon and did not drink it. He sat at his kitchen table and opened his laptop, and for the next 4 hours he did not cry, did not call anyone, did not post anything, he thought. He was a financial analyst by training and by instinct. His professional life was built around the practice of looking at a situation with clarity, identifying what existed, what was exposed, what could move, what couldn't. He applied that lens now with the same discipline he brought to a $20 million portfolio review. What did he actually have? He had a public assault, and it was an assault legally. An open palm strike to the face in front of 200 witnesses in a hotel ballroom. He had names. He had people who had seen it, some of whom had filmed it on their phones. In the instinctive way people film anything unexpected at events, the Dunhill Hotel had security cameras in the main hall. The time and location were documented. What did Derek have? Derek had the VP title at Calloway and Associates, the title his father had given him. He had a salary Marcus knew. From his own financial instincts and some certain family conversations over the years, sat around $310,000 annually. He had a 22% equity stake in Calloway and Associates, which the firm's last public valuation, done for a 2021 bank financing round, had placed the company at approximately $18.4 million. His stake, therefore, was worth roughly $4 million on paper. He had a mortgage on a home in Ballantyne worth $1.1 million. He drove a lease BMW 7 Series. He had a wife, Sandra, who worked part-time at a private school and was, by all accounts, unaware of several things. Marcus knew some of those things. Not because he'd been looking, because he was the kind of person who noticed, and because over the years, certain information had come to him through the natural osmosis of shared family space, mutual professional acquaintances in Charlotte's financial community, and a mind that cataloged what it observed. He opened a new document on his laptop and started writing, not a plan yet, an inventory. Everything he knew, everything he could verify, everything that existed, documented or documentable, that told the true story of Derek Calloway's professional and personal conduct. It took him until 2 in the morning. When he was done, he closed the laptop, drank the bourbon, and slept. Marcus just crossed a line in his own mind. No going back. Have you ever had that moment where you stopped being the bigger person and started planning? Tell me about it in the comments. The plan took 11 weeks to build. Marcus did not rush a single step. The first call he made, not the next morning, but 3 days later, when he had thought through everything clearly, was to a Charlotte-based attorney named Patricia Osei. Marcus had crossed paths with her twice through professional networking events. She was a civil litigation attorney with a quiet but formidable reputation, specializing in employment and personal injury matters. He called her on a Tuesday morning, described the events of September 14th in precise factual terms, and asked for a consultation. They met the following Thursday. Patricia listened to the account with the focused attention of someone who had heard many stories and was tracking the ones with legs. She asked about documentation. Marcus had already pulled together the following: a formal incident report he had filed with the Dunhill Hotel on September 16th, not a police report yet, a hotel incident report, which created a dated record, the names of 7 guests he had personally identified as witnesses, including 2 Calloway and Associates board members, and a Charlotte City Councilman who had been seated at table 7 with clear sightlines, and a text message from a college friend who had been at the event and had sent Marcus a video clip at 11:47 p.m. on September 14th, taken on his phone from 30 feet away, which captured the strike and Derek's statement in audio sufficient for transcription. Patricia reviewed the clip on Marcus's phone. She looked up. "This is a civil battery claim," she said, "clear and documentable. The damages calculation, emotional distress, public humiliation, the reputational context. With the witness profile in that room, this is a filing I could put together." Marcus told her he wasn't ready to file yet. He wanted to understand all his options first. They discussed what a filing would look like, what discovery would compel, and what Derek's exposure would be. Patricia noted that Derek's professional standing would be relevant to damages. She also noted that the video, combined with the witness list, made this an unusually well-documented claim. Marcus paid her consultation fee $420 and told her he would be back in touch. He walked out with the knowledge that the legal option was ready, the documentation was solid, and the trigger was in his hand. The second element of the plan was more delicate. 3 weeks after the party, Marcus received a call from a cousin on his mother's side, Diane, 44, who had been at the event and who had called to check on him. She was not a gossip. She was a thoughtful woman who was also, quietly, one of the few family members who had always treated Marcus and Derek identically. He had always respected her for it. In the course of their conversation, she mentioned, carefully, as people mention things they want you to know but aren't sure how to say, that there had been considerable discussion within the family about what had happened, that several people who had been in that room were troubled, that Gerald had not addressed it. Marcus asked her, gently, whether she would be willing to provide a written statement about what she observed that night if he ever needed it, not for anything yet, just to have. Diane said yes without hesitation. The third element was the one Marcus had been sitting on for 2 years. In the summer of 2022, Marcus had been having lunch with a former Calloway and Associates employee, a woman named Tricia Fenn, who had worked as the firm's operations coordinator for 4 years before leaving for a position at another company. They weren't close friends, but they had overlapped professionally through a mutual industry association. And when she'd left Calloway and Associates, she had mentioned, in the way people mention things they want witnessed, that Derek had taken credit in the company's internal reporting system for 2 lease transactions that had been substantially sourced and closed by her and another coordinator, Brendan Amos. Brendan had subsequently left the firm as well. At the time, Marcus had noted it and moved on. It wasn't his fight. It wasn't his company. Now he picked up the thread. He reached out to Tricia with a professional email, framed carefully. He was doing some personal research. He was not at Calloway and Associates. He had no current involvement. He simply wanted to understand her experience. They met for coffee on a Thursday in October. Tricia was 38, articulate and still quietly furious about what had happened. She had documentation. She was a coordinator. She lived by documentation, including email chains, internal deal logs with date stamps, and a formal complaint she had filed with HR in February 2022, which had been acknowledged and then, to her knowledge, not acted upon. She said she had never pursued it further because she had found a better job and had decided to move forward. Marcus asked if she would be willing to revisit it. He explained that he was considering certain action reasons related to the firm and that her documentation might be relevant. He was honest with her. He was Gerald Calloway's son, and he had no interest in damaging the firm itself. Only an accurate accountability for specific conduct. She asked him to give her a week to think. She came back in 5 days. Yes, Brendan Amos. When Marcus tracked him down through LinkedIn, he was now at a commercial property management firm in Raleigh, said the same. Marcus is building something here. Do you see where this is going? Drop your prediction in the comments before the plan unfolds. The fourth element was the one Marcus handled personally, and it was the one that required the most patience. In mid-October, approximately 5 weeks after the party, Marcus called his father, not to confront him, not to demand acknowledgement, to have a measured, adult conversation, one that Marcus recorded on his phone legally and with the North Carolina one-party consent rule firmly in mind. Gerald answered on the third ring and immediately adopted the slightly formal, slightly distant tone he used with Marcus in one-on-one settings. Marcus said he was calling because he wanted to talk about the party. Gerald said it had been a wonderful evening. Marcus said he was referring to the incident. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Derek had a few drinks, Gerald said. He's been under a lot of pressure. Marcus said he understood that. He asked his father whether he felt what had happened was acceptable. Gerald said he didn't want to get in the middle of his son's relationship. Marcus said he appreciated that. He asked specifically whether his father intended to address it with Derek, with anyone in any way. There was a pause. Then Gerald said, Marcus, Derek runs the company. I need things stable. Marcus let that sentence live in the silence for a moment. Then he said he understood, thanked his father for his time, and ended the call. He saved the recording under a file name that contained the date and time. He sat with what his father had said for a long time. Derek runs the company. I need things stable. Not, this was wrong. Not, your brother shouldn't have done that. Not, you deserved better. The calculus was purely operational. Derek was the business. Marcus was the disruption. He had known this on some level his entire life. Hearing it in his father's own voice in a recorded conversation was different. It was clarifying. The fifth element arrived unexpectedly, and it was the one that changed the weight of everything. In the first week of November, Marcus received a message on LinkedIn from a woman named Courtney Webb. He did not know her. Her profile listed her as a commercial real estate broker based in Charlotte. Her message was brief. She had heard through a professional contact that he was Gerald Calloway's son, and she wanted to speak with him privately. She had information relevant to Calloway and Associates. She preferred not to put details in writing. Marcus was careful. He verified her professional profile. It was real, active, consistent over several years. He asked a contact at his firm who worked adjacent to the commercial real estate sector whether the name was familiar. It was. Courtney Webb was a legitimate broker with a solid mid-market reputation. He agreed to meet her at a coffee shop in South End. Courtney Webb was in her early 40s, composed and visibly nervous. She told Marcus that 6 months earlier she had introduced a client, a regional grocery chain looking to expand into 2 North Carolina markets, to Calloway and Associates as potential site lease brokers. The standard arrangement was a co-brokering agreement with a defined commission split. The deal had closed. Calloway and Associates had received the commission. She had received nothing, and her follow-up attempts had been ignored. And when she had engaged an attorney to send a formal demand letter, Derek Calloway had personally called her and told her she had the voicemail, that she had misunderstood the arrangement, and that the documentation did not support her claim. The commission in question was $118,000. She had not filed suit because her attorney had told her that the co-brokering agreement, while clearly implied through email correspondence, had never been reduced to a signed formal document, a detail that Derek had apparently been careful about. Her case was viable but uncertain. Marcus asked to hear the voicemail. She played it on her phone, Derek's voice. Dismissive, vaguely threatening, and precisely what Marcus needed. He took Patricia Osie's card from his wallet and placed it on the table. He told Courtney that Patricia was a civil litigation attorney who might be interested in reviewing her matter, and that he suspected Courtney might not be the only person with a similar experience. He asked Courtney whether she was willing to have that conversation. She picked up the card. By the end of November, Patricia Osie had 3 clients: Marcus Calloway, Courtney Webb, and Tricia Fenn, whose documentation of internal credit theft, combined with Brendan Amos's corroborating statement, had been sufficiently strong that Patricia had also sent a formal demand letter to Calloway and Associates General Counsel. Patricia had also identified in the course of her research that Calloway and Associates was subject to licensure requirements under the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, and that Derek Calloway, as a licensed broker in charge, was individually subject to the Commission's Code of Conduct. Commission complaints were a matter of public record. Marcus had not gone looking for any of this. He had created the conditions for it to find him. The 6th element was the one that made it permanent. Marcus had, in his career, developed a professional relationship with a business journalist named Kevin Marsh, who covered commercial real estate and finance for the Charlotte Business Journal. They had spoken twice on background for pieces Kevin was working on. Marcus had given color on market conditions, nothing attributable. They were not friends, but they had each other's contact information and mutual professional respect. In the 2nd week of December, Marcus sent Kevin a brief email. He noted that Calloway and Associates had some interesting developments that might warrant coverage. Specifically, a pattern of commission and credit disputes involving multiple parties that had now generated formal legal activity. He was not a source on background. He was making an introduction. He offered to connect Kevin with Courtney Webb and separately with Tricia Fenn, both of whom had consented to speak with journalists. Kevin replied within 4 hours. Marcus stepped back and let it run. The execution began on January 9th, which was the date Patricia Osie filed the civil battery suit against Derek Calloway in Mecklenburg County, Superior Court on Marcus's behalf. The filing was public record. It contained the incident description, the date, the venue, the witness list, including 7 named individuals, and the video documentation described as evidence. The damages sought were $175,000. By January 10th, Kevin Marsh had the filing. He ran it past his editor. They decided it was news. By January 11th, Kevin had spoken with Courtney Webb for 2 hours. He had the voicemail recording. He had reviewed Tricia Fenn's documentation. He had also found, through his own reporting, a 4th party, a property management company in Concord that had a 3-year-old unresolved dispute with Calloway and Associates over a property management fee that had been diverted. The owner of the company had been reluctant to speak for years. With the context that multiple other parties were now documented, he agreed to go on record. On January 14th, the North Carolina Relay Commission received formal complaints against Derek Calloway's broker license from 2 parties. Courtney Webb, through Patricia Osei and Tricia Fenn through her own newly retained counsel. On January 15th, Patricia Osei sent a formal demand letter to Calloway and Associates General Counsel, referencing the pending litigation, the commission complaints, and the specific documented instances of internal credit misattribution, and offering a settlement conference. On January 17th, the Charlotte Business Journal published a 1,400-word investigative piece titled Multiple Parties Allégées: Pattern of Disputes at Calloway and Associates. It named Derek Calloway. It described the lawsuit. It described the commission complaints. It quoted Courtney Webb on the record. It quoted the Concord Property Management Company owner on the record. It included a statement from Calloway and Associates General Counsel saying the claims were without merit and being reviewed, which is the statement a general counsel gives when things are not fine. Marcus did not comment for the piece. He had asked Kevin not to contact him. He was not a source. He had introduced two sources and then removed himself. The story existed on its own foundation, built by the people Derek had actually wronged. Marcus read the piece on his phone in his apartment on a Wednesday morning, with his first cup of coffee, in the same kitchen where he had sat 11 weeks earlier with an untouched bourbon and a blank document. He did not celebrate. He read it twice, carefully, the way he read anything consequential, and then he set his phone down and finished his coffee. But the piece was not the end. The piece was the pressure. 2 days later, Gerald Calloway called Marcus for the first time since their October phone call. Marcus answered. His father's voice was different, not the formal distance of their usual calls, something rawer, less certain, with an edge that Marcus had never heard in it before, something that might have been fear. Gerald said the article was causing problems. Clients had called. 2 board members had called. The general counsel had scheduled an emergency meeting. He said Marcus needed to understand what was at stake for the family. Marcus said he did understand. He asked his father whether, on September 14th, he had understood what was at stake for Marcus. Gerald didn't answer. Marcus said he had one question. He wanted to know whether his father intended to let Derek continue in his role, given what was now documented. He was asking not as a son with a grievance, but as a person who had legal standing and documented evidence and a decision to make about how far the litigation would proceed. There was a long silence. Gerald said he needed time. Marcus said he had 2 weeks. What happened in those 2 weeks at Calloway and Associates was not visible to Marcus, and he made no effort to see it. He had learned what he needed to from his father's voice, and the general counsel's statement, and the board members' calls. The machinery was moving without his hands on it. On January 30th, a settlement offer came through Patricia Osei. Calloway and Associates, through its general counsel, offered to settle Marcus's civil battery claim for $165,000 with a mutual non-disparagement clause. Patricia advised Marcus that it was a strong offer, less than the full $175,000 sought, but within a range that avoided trial. Marcus counter-proposed 3 terms, a settlement of $168,500, known as the disparagement clause, and a formal written acknowledgement, signed by Derek Calloway personally, that the incident of September 14th had occurred and that Derek accepted full responsibility. Not a legal admission, a personal one, a sentence, in writing, signed. The general counsel pushed back on the 3rd term for 4 days. Derek had reportedly refused twice. On the 5th day, the general counsel called Patricia and said Derek would sign. 3 days after that signing, the North Carolina Real Estate Commission notified Derek Calloway that his broker's license was under formal review and that he was required to appear before the commission within 60 days. 2 weeks after that, the Charlotte Business Journal ran a follow-up piece. Calloway and Associates VP steps down amid ongoing disputes. Derek had resigned his VP title. He retained his equity stake. That was a company matter, not a court matter, but he was no longer an officer of the firm. The piece ran 4 paragraphs. It didn't need more. Now that you've seen how it played out, was Marcus justified? Did he go too far? or not far enough? Give me your verdict in the comments. Marcus Calloway received the $168,500 settlement wire on February 18th. He transferred $50 of it to a long-term investment account he had opened the year before. The rest went into his general portfolio. He sent Courtney Webb a text that said, "Patricia tells me your matter is moving. I hope it resolves the way it should." Courtney's commission dispute ultimately settled for $94,000 in March. Tricia Fenn's complaint contributed to the commission's finding against Derek, which resulted in a formal censure and a mandatory compliance course, not a license revocation, but a public mark on his professional record that would follow him in every future real estate transaction, every background check, every due diligence review any partner or client ever ran on his name. Marcus did not contact his father again for 3 months. When he did, it was a brief call. His father's birthday, early April, because regardless of everything, certain things still mattered to Marcus. The call was short and careful. Gerald said he was glad Marcus had called. Marcus said he was glad too. There was no reconciliation in the Hallmark sense, no tearful acknowledgement, no rewritten mythology. Gerald Calloway was not the kind of man who dismantled things he had built inside himself, and Marcus had understood for a long time that forgiveness and accountability were not the same transaction. He forgave his father in the private, internal sense, the one that was for his own peace, not his father's comfort. He did not pretend the call on October 19th had not happened, or that his father's choice of stability over justice had not told him everything he needed to know. The framed photo, the one from Lake Norman, the 9-year-old Marcus and a younger Gerald before the mythology had fully calcified, sat on Marcus's bookshelf. He had kept it, not as sentiment, as evidence that there had been a time, early enough and brief enough, when he had simply been a child, and his father had simply been his father, without all the scaffolding. That was the version worth keeping. As for Derek, the equity stake remained, but the role was gone. The professional standing was marked. The voicemail with his voice existed in public litigation records. The Charlotte business journals existed in search results that would never go away, and the signed written acknowledgement, one sentence, his own name, his own hand, existed in Patricia Osie's files and in Marcus's personal documents, where it would remain for as long as Marcus chose to keep it, which was forever. The slap had taken less than a second. 200 people had seen it. Derek had given Marcus everything he needed in that moment: the public witness, the clean documentation, the absolute moral clarity of being the person struck, in a room full of witnesses, by the person who had always needed him to be smaller. Marcus had simply been patient enough to use it. He had not needed anger to do it. He had not needed anyone's permission, or his father's intervention, or a dramatic confrontation with chandeliers and accusations. He had needed a document, a date, a phone call returned, a journalist's email address, and 11 weeks of disciplined, unhurried surgical patience. The plan had never been about the slap. The slap had been about a lifetime. The plan was just the final accounting. On a Thursday evening in late February, 3 weeks after the settlement, Marcus had dinner with his 3 closest friends at a restaurant they liked in South End. Nobody toasted anything dramatic. There was no formal moment of recognition. They ate well, they talked about other things, and at one point his friend Devin, who had known Marcus for 9 years, and who had been at the Dunhill that night, he was one of the 7 witnesses named in the filing, looked at him and said simply, "You okay?" Marcus thought about it genuinely, the way he thought about everything. "Yeah," he said, "I really am." And that was the truth. Not the performed truth, not the truth you say to close the subject, the actual truth. The one that costs something to reach. He was okay. He had stood in a room where someone who had always needed him to be the footnote had made the last mistake that required Marcus to be the footnote. He had walked out quietly. He had built something careful and documented and real. He had let the truth do the work, and now he was having dinner with people who had always seen him clearly, in a city he had chosen, in a life he had built himself, and he was fine. That was the revenge. Not the settlement amount, not Derek's resignation, not the commission censure. Those were consequences, satisfying and proportionate and real, but consequences. The actual revenge was this, the absolute, unambiguous, documented demonstration that Marcus Calloway had never needed anyone's acknowledgement to be exactly who he was. He had just needed one clear night to prove it. If you've ever gotten even, or wished you had, tell me in the comments.